Have you ever trusted someone with all your heart, only to be betrayed right in front of everyone? Imagine this. You're carrying a child, sitting in the middle of a glittering dinner, and the man you call your husband walks in holding hands with his mistress, smiling with arrogance. Your heart shatters, every eye in the room turns to you, waiting for the moment you break. But what if at that very instant, a powerful hand placed a stack of papers in front of you and in front of everyone handed you the entire fortune, the family's honor, and the legacy itself? What would you do? Trust me, tonight's story isn't just about a scandal in a millionaire's mansion. It's a mirror of real life for so many of us who have been hurt, humiliated, overlooked, until the day we rise and silence the world. So let me ask you, if this happened to you, would you collapse or would you rise? Now let's begin our story. The mansion sparkled like a jewel against the night sky. Its marble pillars glistened under the floodlights, and the long driveway was lined with cars worth more than most people's homes. Inside, the air was heavy with perfume, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. It should have been a night of celebration, but for one woman standing near the edge of the grand dining hall, it was a night of humiliation. Emma Carter, 6 months pregnant, clutched her glass of sparkling water, her other hand resting gently over her rounded belly. She wore a soft ivory dress, simple and modest, in stark contrast to the glittering gowns of the other women. Her face was pale, her eyes weary, but still graceful in a way that only kindness and quiet dignity could grant. She had not wanted to be here. Her husband, Damien Carter, insisted. "You must stand by my side tonight," he had said sharply earlier that day. "Appearances matter more than your fragile feelings." Now she understood why. The orchestra played a soft tune in the background, violins blending with the gentle hum of conversation. At the far end of the room, Damien entered, his presence commanding as always. He wore a black, tailored tuxedo, his posture tall, his smile practiced. Heads turned immediately. Whispers floated in the air, praise for his success, admiration for his charm. But Damien wasn't alone. On his arm was a young woman with fiery red hair cascading over her shoulders, her shimmering scarlet gown hugging every curve. Clara. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Though she had long suspected her husband's betrayal, seeing Clara arrive so brazenly, clinging to Damien like a prize, was a dagger through her heart. Gasps echoed around the room. The guests, seasoned in scandal, immediately recognized the audacity of this moment. A millionaire bringing his mistress into his marital home, into a dinner where his pregnant wife already stood. It was unthinkable, even among the shameless elite. Damien looked directly at Emma across the hall. For the briefest second, their eyes met. There was no shame in his gaze, no hesitation. Instead, he smirked, as if daring her to react, as if relishing the humiliation. Clara tightened her grip on his arm, whispering something into his ear. Damien threw back his head and laughed loudly enough for everyone to hear. Emma's chest tightened. The room spun, voices blending into an indistinct buzz. She could feel the pity in people's stares, the judgmental murmurs traveling from one corner to another. She looked so pale. Imagine being humiliated like that, in her condition. She should leave. How can she stand there? But she couldn't leave. Her legs felt like stone, her dignity glued her to the floor. For the sake of the child inside her, she refused to break in front of them. Still, her hand trembled as she raised the glass of water to her lips. Damien raised his champagne flute, commanding silence with just a gesture. The orchestra stopped, all eyes turned toward him. His voice boomed across the grand hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone dripping with arrogance, "thank you for joining us tonight in this house that has become a symbol of success, of ambition, of everything I have built with my own hands." There was applause. He thrived on it, feeding off the admiration. Then, with deliberate cruelty, he turned toward Clara and pulled her closer. "And tonight, I want you all to meet someone very special to me." The crowd leaned in, murmuring. Emma's heart pounded in her ears. "This is Clara," Damien announced. "She is the woman who has brought new joy into my life." The words struck like a whip. Gasps rippled across the room, followed by scattered, uncomfortable laughter. Clara beamed, soaking up the attention. She leaned in to kiss Damien on the cheek, then turned her gaze toward Emma. Their eyes locked. Clara's smile widened into a smirk. "Poor thing. Clara whispered loudly enough for several guests to hear, still clinging to a title that doesn't belong to her anymore. Emma's lips parted, but no words came. The room erupted in whispers. Shame and rage churned inside her chest. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but she stood frozen, her hands instinctively covering her belly, shielding her child from the ugliness around her. Damien raised his glass higher, oblivious, or perhaps indifferent to the storm he had created. "To new beginnings," he declared. The guests raised their glasses hesitantly. Some smiled, eager to stay in his favor. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the cruel spectacle. Emma felt her throat close. Each second was torture. But then, just as the applause died down, a commanding voice cut through the noise. "Enough." The single word was sharp, firm, and filled with authority. The entire hall fell silent. All heads turned toward the source. At the far end of the long dining table, Eleanor Carter, Damien's mother, slowly rose to her feet. Her silver hair shimmered in the light, her posture regal despite her age. Her cane tapped softly against the polished marble floor as she stepped forward, her eyes colder than the winter wind. Damien stiffened. Clara's smile faltered. Even Emma, shocked, stared at the woman who had rarely spoken more than a few polite sentences at family gatherings. Eleanor was known for her silence, her elegance, her ability to observe without interference. But now her piercing gaze swept the room, commanding every pair of eyes. "Sit down," she told Damien quietly, though the whole hall heard. Her tone was not a request, it was an order. Damien frowned, visibly irritated. "Mother, this is my dinner. I will." Eleanor raised a hand, silencing him. The power in her gesture was undeniable. Her voice was steady, unshaken. "You have embarrassed yourself, you have disgraced your wife, and you have shamed this family." Gasps erupted again. Clara's cheeks flushed crimson. Damien's jaw tightened, but he didn't dare speak further. Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had never seen Eleanor like this. She had always assumed her mother-in-law was distant, perhaps even complicit in Damien's arrogance. But in this moment, Eleanor looked at her, not with pity, but with something Emma couldn't quite name. Something sharp, determined. The silence stretched long, heavy. Then Eleanor said, "Everyone will remain seated. There is something you must all see." She motioned to one of the butlers, who immediately disappeared and returned with a leather folder. Eleanor took it in her wrinkled hands, her eyes never leaving Emma's. Slowly, she walked toward the center of the room. The sound of her cane echoed like a drumbeat of destiny. Emma's breath caught in her chest. Every eye followed Eleanor, waiting, whispering. And then Eleanor stopped beside Emma. She placed the folder gently on the table, her hand lingering there for a moment. The room held its breath. "This," Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the hall, "changes everything." Emma Carter had not been born into wealth, nor had she ever imagined herself living in a marble mansion filled with chandeliers and fine art. Her life before Damien had been simple, modest, and in many ways far happier. She grew up in a quiet town outside of Philadelphia, raised by her widowed mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Emma learned early the value of sacrifice, of humility, of cherishing the small things. She wasn't the kind of woman who dreamed of yachts or diamond necklaces. Her dreams were of family dinners, laughter in the kitchen, and someday, children of her own running barefoot across a sunlit yard. Teaching had always been her calling. Even as a teenager, she spent weekends tutoring younger kids at the library. After earning her degree in education, she took a position at a small elementary school. Her students adored her. She was the teacher who remembered birthdays, who stayed late helping struggling readers, who packed extra snacks for kids who came to school hungry. She never had much, but she gave everything she had. When Emma first met Damien Carter, she thought she had stumbled into a fairy tale. It happened one rainy afternoon at the public library, where Emma often stopped to grade papers. She had been juggling an armful of books when a tall man in a sharp suit stepped forward and caught them before they tumbled to the ground. His smile was dazzling, his confidence magnetic. Damien was unlike anyone Emma had ever met. He spoke with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention, yet he listened to her with a focus that made her cheeks warm. At first, she resisted his charm. Men like Damien didn't usually look twice at women like her. Women who wore modest dresses from outlet stores, who lived in tiny apartments with mismatched furniture. But Damien was relentless. He sent flowers to her classroom, waited outside the school to walk her home, and made grand declarations about her being the only woman who truly saw him. 6 months later, they were married. The whirlwind romance swept Emma off her feet. Suddenly, the woman who used to ride the bus was stepping out of limousines. The girl who used to clip coupons was dining at 5-star restaurants. At first, she was overwhelmed, even uncomfortable. But Damien promised her that money didn't matter. "I want you, Emma," he had whispered the night he proposed, slipping a diamond ring onto her trembling hand. "Not your past, not your background. Just you." For a while, she believed him. Their early years of marriage were filled with laughter and late-night walks through Central Park. Damien would bring her breakfast in bed, write her notes tucked inside her purse, and talk endlessly about the empire he was building. Emma supported him wholeheartedly, even when his long hours left her lonely. She told herself it was worth it, that all great men sacrifice their time for success, and she wanted to be the loyal wife standing proudly at his side. Then came the pregnancy. When Emma discovered she was expecting, she cried tears of joy. She imagined Damien lifting their baby in his arms, his pride overflowing. She pictured nursery walls painted in soft pastels, tiny clothes folded neatly in drawers, lullabies sung in the quiet of night. For Emma, this child was everything, the dream she had carried since she was a girl. Damien's reaction was different. At first, he smiled, kissed her cheek, and told her they would manage. But soon his distance grew. He stayed out later, often claiming business meetings that stretched past midnight. He complained about the cost of prenatal vitamins, about the need to renovate the nursery. Once, when she gently asked if he was excited, his response had chilled her. "I don't have time for this emotional nonsense," he snapped. "I'm building something real. A child is a distraction." Emma never forgot those words. From that moment, a crack formed in the foundation of their marriage. She tried to hide her tears, to keep peace, to believe that stress made him cruel. But deep down, she felt him slipping away. And then came Clara. Emma had noticed subtle changes at first: the scent of expensive perfume on his shirts, lipstick smudges on the rim of glasses he left in his car, whispered phone calls late at night. When she confronted him gently, he dismissed her fears with cutting remarks. "You're paranoid. Pregnant hormones," he scoffed. "Don't embarrass yourself." But the truth revealed itself one afternoon when Emma walked past Damien's study and heard his low voice on the phone, soft and affectionate in a way it hadn't been with her for months. "I miss you, Clara," he said. "Soon, it will all be yours." Emma froze. The name echoed in her mind like a curse. She retreated quietly, clutching her belly, trying not to collapse under the weight of betrayal. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless, invisible, discarded. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she thought of her child and stayed silent. Her mother had raised her to endure, to survive storms with dignity. So she endured, even as the man she loved paraded his mistress through whispers and rumors that eventually became undeniable truth. By the time of the mansion dinner, Emma's heart was already bruised. Yet she still clung to a sliver of hope, that Damien would choose their family, that his cruelty was temporary. That hope shattered the moment Clara walked into the dining hall on his arm. Now, standing in the grand hall, Emma's mind reeled with memories of the life she had given up, the sacrifices she had made, the love she had poured into a marriage that had become a stage for her humiliation. Her hand tightened over her belly. She whispered silently to her unborn child, "I will protect you, no matter what." And then Eleanor rose to her feet, her voice slicing through the air, her eyes locked on Emma with a fire she had never seen before. Emma had no idea that in just moments her entire fate would be rewritten. The Carter mansion was a palace disguised as a home. Perched high on a hill overlooking the Hudson River, its sprawling grounds stretched farther than the eye could see. The driveway was a winding road of cobblestone, flanked by fountains and meticulously sculpted hedges. Luxury cars lined up outside that evening, each vehicle announcing the wealth and status of the guests within. Inside, the mansion pulsed with the kind of extravagance that both dazzled and suffocated. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from ceilings painted with elaborate murals. Golden sconces cast a warm glow over marble floors polished to a mirror finish. Waiters in black tuxedos floated through the crowd, balancing silver trays of champagne and caviar, while a string quartet filled the air with music that sounded more like background to an opera than a dinner party. The dining hall itself was breathtaking. A long mahogany table stretched nearly the length of the room, set with fine china, crystal goblets, and napkins folded into intricate shapes. Each place was marked with name cards, embossed in gold. Centerpieces of white roses and orchids cascaded across the table, their fragrance mixing with the scent of truffle and foie gras being carried in from the kitchen. The guests were New York's elite. Real estate tycoons, hedge fund managers, socialites with last names engraved in history. They laughed too loudly, smiled too wide, and carried an air of superiority that pressed on Emma's chest like a weight. These were people who lived on reputation, who thrived on appearances, who dissected every detail of what others wore, said, or even implied. Emma felt painfully out of place. She stood near the edge of the room, her ivory dress simple compared to the sequined gowns shimmering under the chandeliers. Pearls circled some women's necks like collars of power. Diamonds glittered on their fingers, while Emma wore only her wedding ring. A plain gold band that, tonight, felt less like a promise and more like a chain. Her hand instinctively rested on her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the whispers that inevitably followed her. She could hear them, low murmurs that pricked at her skin. She looks exhausted. Did you hear? He doesn't even come home most nights anymore. Poor thing, pregnant and alone, and yet still standing here. Emma's throat tightened. She wanted to vanish, to fade into the shadows of the towering columns. But Damien had been clear. She was to attend, to stand beside him, to play the role of devoted wife no matter how broken she felt inside. Suddenly, a hush fell across the hall. The quartet quieted, the conversations dulled. Heads turned toward the grand staircase at the far end of the room. Damien Carter had arrived. He descended with the air of a king returning to his court. His tuxedo was flawless, his shoes shining like obsidian. His smile spread across the room, practiced and perfect, as though he had rehearsed it in the mirror. Applause rippled through the crowd, polite, eager, worshipful. And then everyone saw her. Clara, the mistress, floated down the stairs on his arm like a queen in her own right. Her scarlet gown shimmered with every step, clinging to her figure in a way designed to provoke whispers. Her lips were painted a bold red, her hair a cascade of waves that gleamed in the chandelier light. Clara smiled as though she belonged there, as though this was her mansion, her audience. Gasps traveled through the room. Murmurs swelled like a wave. People exchanged glances, some wide-eyed, some smirking, others hungry for the scandal unfolding before them. Emma's heart dropped into her stomach. Though she had prepared herself, nothing could have braced her for the sight of her husband parading his mistress in their home, at their dinner table, before their peers. It was humiliation, sharpened into spectacle. Damien reached the floor and raised his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing across the hall, "thank you for coming tonight." The orchestra stilled completely, all eyes locked on him. "This house," Damien continued, gesturing grandly at the glittering hall, "stands as a symbol of success, of perseverance, of ambition realized, and tonight it also stands as a place of truth." He turned to Clara, pulling her close. She tilted her head against his shoulder, her smile radiant. "I want you to meet Clara. She has brought new light into my life." The words rang out like a slap. Emma felt the room sway. The air seemed to vanish from her lungs. The whispers became louder, more pointed. Clara, emboldened, swept her gaze across the crowd until it landed squarely on Emma. A smirk twisted her lips. "She does look pale, doesn't she?" Clara said, her voice deceptively sweet, though loud enough to carry. "Poor thing, pregnancy is such a burden." Laughter erupted in small, cruel pockets. Emma's face burned. She pressed a hand against her belly, whispering silently to her child, "Hold on, don't let me break." Damien lifted his glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," he declared. Glasses clinked half-heartedly. Some guests raised theirs with false enthusiasm. Others lowered their eyes, unwilling to openly support such a scandal. The atmosphere was no longer elegant. It was suffocating, poisoned by discomfort and humiliation. Emma's vision blurred with unshed tears. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear from this golden cage. But she stood her ground, her legs rooted, her dignity clinging desperately to the last shred of strength she had left. And then, from the far end of the table, came the sound of a cane striking marble. Once, twice. Firm, unyielding. The room stilled. Eleanor Carter, Damien's mother, rose to her feet. Her silver hair gleamed, her posture rigid, her eyes sharper than any blade. She looked not at Damien, not at Clara, but at Emma. The silence was suffocating. Guests leaned forward, sensing something monumental. Eleanor's voice cut through the air, clear and cold. "Everyone stay seated. There is business to address tonight." Damien frowned, his hand tightening around his glass. Clara blinked, momentarily uncertain. Emma's breath caught in her throat. And with that single command, the entire evening shifted toward a storm no one could yet imagine. Damien Carter was the kind of man who had once charmed the world with his ambition. To the public, he was the picture of success, a self-made millionaire, a man who had risen from modest beginnings to command an empire of real estate, technology, and luxury ventures. But behind closed doors, the shine was fading, and what remained was arrogance, hunger for validation, and an ego that demanded constant feeding. To the crowd in the mansion that night, he was still dazzling, handsome in his black tuxedo, with the easy smile of someone used to applause. Yet those who looked closely would notice something darker. The smug glint in his eyes, the cruel curve of his lips when he glanced at Emma, the way he relished the discomfort rippling through the room. Damien had built his fortune on risk, charm, and ruthless decisions. He was the man who closed deals over a single dinner, who could convince investors with nothing but words. But he had also grown addicted to control, to dominance, to the thrill of breaking rules and still winning. To him, loyalty was weakness, love was conditional, respect was currency, and Clara was his latest acquisition. Clara Russo was 25 years old, younger than Emma by almost a decade. She had been a model, though her career never rose beyond magazine covers and promotional campaigns. What she lacked in professional accomplishment, she made up for in beauty, and in her relentless hunger for status. She had met Damien at a charity gala, where she'd been seated deliberately at his table by a mutual acquaintance. That night, Clara had leaned in close, laughed at all his jokes, and whispered just enough admiration to make him feel invincible. Damien, craving novelty, had fallen quickly. To Clara, Damien was not just a man, he was her golden ticket. She saw in him the life she believed she deserved, the mansion, the wealth, the glittering stage where others envied her. With Damien, she could step into a role Emma could never play, the role of a glamorous queen in the world of the elite. But Clara wasn't content with being the other woman. She wanted more. She wanted Emma erased from the picture, the wife cast aside so Clara could wear the crown openly. And she was bold enough to say it. As Damien introduced her to the guests that night, Clara's smile never wavered. She greeted them with practiced charm, her voice honeyed, her laughter like bells. But beneath the sweetness was steel. Every glance she shot toward Emma was laced with triumph, every word chosen to sting. "Pregnancy does take a toll, doesn't it?" Clara cooed to one guest, her eyes sliding deliberately toward Emma's pale face. "I don't know how she manages to keep up appearances. I suppose not everyone is cut out for this world." The guest chuckled nervously, darting a glance at Emma before quickly looking away. Clara thrived on that discomfort, the way others joined in her cruelty to avoid being her next target. Damien chuckled too, as though Clara's cruelty was entertainment. He placed a hand on the small of her back, pulling her closer, proud to display her as though she were a prized possession. To him, Emma was no longer a partner, no longer a woman he once promised forever. She was a relic, a dull stone beside the diamond he believed Clara to be. He didn't care that Emma carried his child. In fact, he seemed almost resentful of it, as though the pregnancy was an inconvenience, a distraction from his glittering life. "Emma," Damien's voice rang out suddenly across the table, his smile wide, his tone cutting. "Don't you think Clara looks stunning tonight?" The room shifted. Heads turned. Emma's cheeks burned as every eye fell on her. She looks very elegant." Emma managed softly, her voice barely audible. Damien smirked. "See? Even my wife agrees." Clara's laugh was sharp, triumphant. She leaned forward, her hand brushing Damien's arm, her eyes never leaving Emma's. "It's kind of her to admit it. Not every woman can be so gracious when times are changing." The implication hung heavy in the air. Emma's grip tightened around her fork, her knuckles white. Damien raised his glass again, enjoying the spectacle. To change, then, to the future. Some guests raised their glasses half-heartedly, others exchanged uneasy glances. A few whispered to each other, already plotting how to use this scandal for gossip. To the onlookers, the picture was clear. Damien had chosen Clara, and Emma was being pushed aside in plain view. But there was one person in the room who saw more than humiliation. Eleanor Carter, seated at the far end, watched with eyes that missed nothing. She had long known her son's flaws, but never had she seen him stoop so low. Never had he dared to bring shame upon his wife in such a public and cruel way. And never before had another woman, the mistress no less, looked her directly in the eye with such arrogance. For Clara, Eleanor was just an obstacle to overcome. More than once that evening, Clara's words slipped into disrespect. "Mrs. Carter," Clara said sweetly at one point, leaning toward her, "don't you think times are different now? Old traditions, they can be so restricting. A man should be free to follow his heart, don't you agree?" The hall went silent at that. The audacity of it, the mistress questioning the matriarch in her own home, was staggering. Some guests stared in disbelief. Damien chuckled nervously, trying to brush it off, but Eleanor's face remained unreadable. Clara, mistaking silence for weakness, pressed further. "I mean, with all due respect, the future belongs to women like me. Bold, modern, fearless." She glanced at Emma, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Not women stuck clinging to rings and titles they can't protect." Emma's chest tightened, her breath caught. The sting of Clara's words pierced deeper than the stares. But it wasn't just Emma who reacted. Eleanor's fingers tightened on her cane, her eyes narrowing. For the first time in the evening, Emma saw something flicker in her mother-in-law's gaze. Not detachment, not cold distance, but anger. Clara laughed lightly, raising her glass. "To new eras, then." Damien clinked glasses with her, grinning. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he had the room under his control. But Eleanor's silence was not weakness, it was calculation. And as her eyes lingered on Emma's trembling hands over her belly, Eleanor knew exactly what she had to do. The storm was coming, and Damien and Clara had no idea they were about to be swept away. The dinner began as a performance, but soon it descended into something far darker. The orchestra resumed its music, though softer now, as if even the violins were uneasy with the atmosphere. Waiters carried silver trays laden with courses that looked more like art than food. Tiny arrangements of foie gras, truffle-infused soup, and roasted pheasant carved at the table. Guests pretended to focus on their meals, but the real entertainment was unfolding in plain sight. All eyes lingered on the triangle at the head of the table. Damien, basking in his arrogance, Clara, glowing in her stolen triumph, and Emma, sitting silently, every breath an act of survival. Damien leaned back in his chair, his arm draped casually over Clara's shoulders. He spoke loudly, deliberately, so the room could not help but hear. "You know, Clara has the most exquisite taste," he announced, lifting his wine glass. "She helped choose this vintage tonight. Emma never really cared for these things." A ripple of chuckles floated across the table. Emma's stomach twisted. He had never spoken to her with such cruelty before. Not in public, not in a way designed to strip her dignity so completely. Clara laughed lightly, pressing a manicured hand against Damien's chest. "Oh, don't be unkind. She tries." Then, turning her head slightly toward Emma, she added, "But of course, it's difficult to appreciate such things when one is occupied." Her eyes flicked to Emma's belly. Laughter, sharper this time, erupted from a corner of the table. Emma's hands tightened in her lap. She wanted to vanish beneath the tablecloth, to run from the room, but her body stayed rigid. Damien raised his glass again. "To Clara's impeccable taste, and to all the ways she has improved my life." The words cut deeper than any blade. Emma felt her throat burn, her eyes sting, but she refused to let tears fall. She would not give them that satisfaction. But Clara wasn't finished. Between courses, she turned her charm on the guests, laughing and whispering, ensuring everyone saw her as Damien's rightful partner. Her every gesture was calculated. At one point, she deliberately leaned over Emma to reach for a dish, her perfume overwhelming, her smile smug. "Oh, forgive me," Clara said, though her tone held no apology. "It's just, space is rather tight at this table. Some of us take up more room than others." The implication was cruel. Emma's cheeks burned. The guests exchanged glances, some smirking, some uncomfortable. Damien chuckled. "Clara, you mustn't tease. Emma is sensitive these days." Sensitive. The word hung in the air, dripping with mockery. Emma's fork trembled in her hand. She lowered it to the plate, unable to take another bite. "Perhaps," Clara continued sweetly, "when the baby comes, Emma will finally have something of her own to keep her busy. Then she won't need to attend these dinners. It must be exhausting for her, surrounded by people so different." The cruelty was deliberate, and the message clear. Emma did not belong. Damien raised his glass once more. "To new beginnings," he repeated, this time staring directly at Emma. His smirk widened as Clara clinked her glass against his. The table echoed with the sound of crystal against crystal. Emma felt her heart shatter with every note. She couldn't breathe. The walls of the grand hall seemed to close in, the chandeliers above pressing down like judgment. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling so violently that drops spilled onto the tablecloth. "Careful, darling," Damien drawled, his voice dripping with disdain. "Wouldn't want to make a mess." Clara giggled, leaning into him. "Don't be cruel," she said, though her eyes danced with satisfaction. Emma pushed back her chair, the screech against marble silencing the room. Every face turned toward her. She rose unsteadily to her feet, one hand clutching her belly, the other gripping the edge of the table for support. Excuse me," she whispered, her voice cracking. She turned to leave, desperate for air, desperate to escape the stares, the whispers, the suffocating humiliation. But before she could take a step, Damien's voice rang out. "Sit down, Emma." The command froze her in place. His tone was sharp, final, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. The guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty but unwilling to intervene. Emma stood trembling, torn between fleeing and obeying. Slowly, she lowered herself back into the chair. Her dignity felt crushed beneath his heel. Damien smiled, satisfied, as though he had won some invisible battle. Clara rested her head against his shoulder, triumphant. And Emma, broken, lowered her gaze to her plate, her tears finally spilling silently onto the porcelain. She whispered to herself so quietly no one could hear, "Hold on, my child, hold on." The orchestra resumed, but the music was hollow. The laughter that followed was forced, brittle. The dinner had turned into a spectacle of cruelty, and Emma was its unwilling centerpiece. At the far end of the table, Eleanor Carter's hand tightened around her cane. Her eyes burned with fury, though her face remained composed. She had seen enough. The butler approached her quietly, bowing his head as he handed her the leather folder she had requested earlier. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line as she accepted it. She did not look at Damien, she did not look at Clara. Instead, her gaze settled firmly on Emma, on the woman who sat silently humiliated, her hands still trembling over the child she carried. Eleanor rose slowly to her feet, the sound of her cane against marble drawing every eye once again. The hall fell silent. Damien's smirk faltered. Clara's laugh died on her lips. Eleanor stepped forward, her posture regal, her presence commanding. She placed the folder on the table before Emma, her voice clear and unshakable. "It's time the truth was known," she said. The room was silent after Eleanor's words, but inside Emma's chest, chaos raged. She sat frozen, staring at the leather folder before her, unable to comprehend what was happening. Her cheeks burned from tears she had tried to hide. Her hands trembled as they clutched the edge of the table. She wanted to disappear, to flee from the cruel eyes watching her, but she was trapped in the spotlight of shame. Damien broke the silence with a laugh, sharp and mocking. "Mother, please, you don't need to indulge this farce. Emma is, well, she's fragile. Perhaps she's had enough for the evening." Clara leaned in, her lips curling into a smirk. "Yes, poor thing, maybe she should rest. These dinners can be overwhelming." Her gaze lingered cruelly on Emma's belly, especially in her condition. The guests tittered nervously, caught between scandal and sympathy. Emma's humiliation deepened. The folder sat in front of her like a beacon, but she didn't dare touch it. She felt powerless, like a child scolded in public, too broken to defend herself. She whispered inside her heart, "Why am I still here? Why am I letting them tear me apart?" Her vision blurred as shame tightened around her like a noose. She remembered her students at the school, those little eyes that once looked up to her with admiration. What would they think if they saw her now, reduced to nothing more than a spectacle? She thought of her mother, who had worked her fingers raw to raise her, who had taught her that dignity mattered more than gold. Was this dignity? Sitting silently while her husband paraded another woman before her. But most of all, she thought of her unborn child. The tiny heartbeat that had filled her with joy during doctor visits. The soft flutters she sometimes felt at night when she rested her hand on her belly. What kind of life was she bringing this child into? A life of ridicule? A home of betrayal? Her chest heaved. She wanted to scream, to cry out to Damien, "Look at me, I am your wife, I am carrying your child." But when she glanced at him, she saw only cold indifference, his arm wrapped proudly around Clara. Emma pushed back her chair again, rising unsteadily to her feet. This time she didn't care about the whispers, the stares. She needed air. She needed to escape before the walls of the mansion crushed what little strength she had left. Her hand clutched her belly protectively as she turned, her steps shaky across the marble floor. The orchestra faltered, their bows hesitating on the strings as the guests murmured. "Emma!" Damien's voice rang out behind her, sharp and commanding. "Where do you think you're going?" She froze. Every eye locked on her again. Her body trembled, but she did not turn back. Damien's laugh cut through the tension. "Ah, let her go. She needs her rest. After all, she was never built for this world." Clara giggled, her voice like nails scraping glass. "It's true. Some women are meant for greatness, others for the sidelines." Emma stumbled forward, her tears blinding her, until she reached the massive double doors. She pushed them open, stepping into the long hallway beyond. The silence of the corridor wrapped around her, but it wasn't comforting. It was hollow, echoing with every cruel word that had been hurled at her. She leaned against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the cold marble floor, her arms wrapped tightly around her belly. The sobs came then, raw, uncontrollable, tearing through her chest. She pressed her face into her hands, ashamed of her weakness but unable to stop. "I can't do this. I can't raise this child in a house of cruelty. I can't fight them. I'm not strong enough." The thought terrified her. For the first time, Emma doubted herself as a mother. What if she failed her child? What if she was too weak to protect them from the world Damien was creating? Her tears soaked into the silk of her dress. She felt utterly alone. And yet, in the midst of her despair, a gentle movement stirred within her. The baby shifted, pressing softly against her palm. Emma froze, her sobs breaking into silence. She placed both hands over her belly, feeling the tiny life inside her respond, as if reminding her of its presence. Her tears flowed anew, but this time from something deeper than grief. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I promise I'll do better. I'll find a way to keep you safe." Her words trembled in the empty hallway. For the first time that night, her despair cracked to reveal something else: resolve. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. Behind her, the muffled sound of laughter drifted from the dining hall, Damien's voice booming above the rest. Emma clenched her fists. The humiliation had scarred her, but the child inside her gave her a reason to endure. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Strength isn't about never breaking, Emma. It's about standing up again after you've been broken." Emma drew a shaky breath. Maybe she had been broken tonight. Maybe Damien and Clara thought they had won, but for her child's sake, she would not stay broken. At that moment, the doors creaked open behind her. Emma quickly wiped her tears, struggling to stand. She expected Damien, or worse, Clara, come to gloat over her collapse, but it was neither. The figure who stepped into the hallway carried herself with the grace of a queen, her silver hair glowing in the dim light, her cane tapping softly against the floor. Eleanor Carter's eyes, cold and sharp in the dining hall, now softened as they fell on Emma. For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing. She simply looked at the young woman crumpled against the wall, one hand over her belly, her face streaked with tears. And in that moment, Emma saw something unexpected in her mother-in-law's gaze. Not pity, not disdain. Recognition. Eleanor extended her hand. "Come, child," she said quietly. "It's time you knew the truth." Emma stared at the outstretched hand, her heart pounding, knowing her life was about to change forever. Emma hesitated, staring at Eleanor's outstretched hand. For so long she had thought of her mother-in-law as cold, distant, a woman who tolerated her presence but never truly embraced her. Yet here, in the quiet hallway lit by the soft glow of golden sconces, Eleanor's expression was different. Her sharp eyes, usually unreadable, now carried something unexpected. Conviction. Emma rose unsteadily, her hand still trembling as it met Eleanor's. The older woman's grip was firm, steady, grounding. "Come," Eleanor said again, her voice low but filled with authority. "It's time." Confused but too weary to resist, Emma followed her back toward the dining hall. Each step echoed in her chest, her heart pounding louder than the sound of her heels on marble. When they entered, the laughter died instantly. Every guest turned, eyes widening at the sight of Eleanor, leading Emma forward like a queen presenting her heir. Damien's smile faltered, Clara stiffened, and the air crackled with tension. Eleanor walked to the head of the table, her cane striking the floor with measured rhythm. She stopped beside Emma, then motioned for the butler. The leather folder was placed back into her hands. Slowly, Eleanor opened it, her movements deliberate, commanding attention with every gesture. She pulled out a thick stack of documents and laid them on the table where all could see. Damien's voice cut through the silence. "Mother, what are you doing?" Eleanor ignored him. She looked at Emma. "Take them." Emma blinked, stunned. What is this?" Eleanor's voice was steady. "The future." Damien stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mother, enough! This is absurd. These people came here to celebrate me, not to watch you indulge." "Sit down." Eleanor's words were sharp like a blade. For the first time all night, Damien faltered. His jaw tightened, but the weight of her authority pressed him back into his chair. Clara placed a hand on his arm, whispering something, but he shook her off. Eleanor lifted the top document from the stack. The golden seal gleamed under the chandelier light. "These," she said, her gaze sweeping the room, "are the ownership papers to this estate, and more. The Carter holdings, the properties, the legacy of this family." Gasps erupted. Guests leaned forward, their eyes wide, their whispers urgent. Damien's face drained of color. "You can't be serious. Those belong to me." "No." Eleanor's voice thundered with finality. "They belong to this family, and I will not allow you to gamble them away with your arrogance and your mistress." Clara's mouth fell open. "Mistress?" she hissed, her voice sharp with offense. "How dare you?" "Silence," Eleanor snapped, her eyes cutting like ice. Clara froze, stunned into submission. Eleanor turned back to Emma, her expression softening only slightly. "From this moment forward, everything passes to you, Emma. You are my daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandchild, the rightful matriarch of this house." The room erupted in whispers, shock rippling like a storm. Emma's breath caught. I don't understand. Why me?" "Because you have what my son has lost," Eleanor said firmly. "Honor, dignity, compassion, and because the blood of this family, my grandchild, grows within you. That child will inherit a future built on strength, not scandal." Damien slammed his fist onto the table. "You can't do this," he roared. "I am your son." Eleanor's gaze turned to him, hard and unyielding. "And you are a disgrace." The words silenced him. "You think yourself powerful because you command wealth," Eleanor continued, her voice echoing across the hall. "But wealth without honor is nothing. You humiliated your wife, paraded your infidelity in front of peers, and allowed this woman," her eyes flicked disdainfully toward Clara, "to mock your family name. You are no longer fit to lead." Damien's face burned crimson. "You can't take this from me. I built this empire." "No," Eleanor said coldly. "You inherited it, and now you've squandered the right to keep it." Clara leapt to her feet, her composure shattering. "This is ridiculous. You can't just hand everything to her. She's weak, pathetic, clinging to a ring that means nothing." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You dare speak of rings when you wear none and claim another woman's husband? You dare mock the mother of this family's heir?" The hall gasped. Clara's cheeks burned red, but she pressed on. "She's nothing. Look at her, crying in the hallway, breaking under pressure. Do you really believe she can run this empire?" Eleanor leaned forward, her voice a low growl. "She will not run it alone. She will have me. She will have advisors who respect her. And most of all, she has something you will never understand, Clara. She has purpose. She carries the future in her womb, and she will protect it with a strength neither of you possess." Emma's eyes widened, tears glistening, but this time they were not from despair. They were from shock, from the weight of the moment pressing upon her. For the first time all evening, she felt something stir inside her, a spark of worth, of dignity returning. Damien's fists clenched at his sides, his voice shaking with fury. This is betrayal. You choose her over me? Your own son? Eleanor's expression hardened. I choose what is right. Blood is not enough to excuse disgrace. Clara grabbed Damien's arm desperately. Don't let her do this. Say something. Stop her. But Damien could find no words. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor placed the papers directly into Emma's trembling hands. From this night forward, you hold the Carter legacy. Protect it. Protect your child. And know this, you are not alone. Emma's chest heaved, her tears spilling silently as she stared at the documents. The weight of the empire, the house, the legacy, it was all hers now. She looked at Eleanor, unable to speak, her voice trapped by disbelief. The guests sat frozen, their gazes darting between Emma, Damien, and Clara. Whispers began to swell again, spreading like wildfire. Clara's face twisted with rage, her composure completely broken. She stood abruptly, her voice shrill. This isn't over. You think you can erase me, but Damien and I? Enough! Eleanor's voice boomed, silencing her instantly. The hall shook with the force of her command. And in that silence, every guest realized the truth. The balance of power had shifted, and Emma was no longer the humiliated wife. She was the woman holding everything. The leather folder trembled in Emma's hands, the weight of it heavier than gold. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The words of Eleanor still echoed in her ears. From this night forward, you hold the Carter legacy. Emma's tears blurred the letters on the documents. For months, she had felt like a shadow in her own home, ignored, betrayed, humiliated. And yet, in a single moment, the ground beneath her shifted. She wasn't just the wife Damien discarded. She wasn't just the woman Clara mocked. She was the bearer of a future larger than herself, entrusted with a power even Damien couldn't claim. Her chest rose and fell, steadying as something long dormant awoke inside her. Resolve. Clara's voice snapped her back to the present. This is absurd, she cried, her voice shrill and desperate. You can't seriously hand everything to her. She's weak. Look at her shaking. She's not fit for this. Damien snarled, and his face contorted with rage. Mother, you've humiliated me enough. This ends now. But Eleanor didn't flinch. She remained standing tall, her gaze fixed firmly on Emma. No, this begins now. The hall erupted into whispers again, but Emma no longer heard them as daggers. She drew a slow breath and lifted her head. Her eyes swept across the room, and for the first time all evening she met the stares of the elite without shame. Her voice was quiet at first, but steady. You're right, Clara. I was shaking. I was afraid. I thought I didn't belong here. She paused, her hand pressing gently over her belly. But I realize now, fear doesn't make me weak. It makes me human. And what makes me strong is the reason I am still standing here. Her words silenced the whispers. Every guest leaned in. Clara's smirk faltered. Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. For too long, I believed my worth depended on Damien's attention, that I was only valuable if he saw me, if he loved me. But tonight, I see the truth. My worth is not measured by a man who parades betrayal in front of the world. My worth is in the life I carry, in the dignity I still hold, in the family legacy I will protect, not for myself, but for the child who deserves better than this. A ripple moved through the crowd. Several women at the table exchanged glances, some even nodding subtly. They recognized the courage in Emma's words, courage they themselves might have buried under society's demands. Damien's fists clenched. Enough of this sanctimonious nonsense. You're nothing without me. Emma turned her gaze on him. Her voice was calm, steady, like steel wrapped in silk. No, Damien. I was nothing with you. Gasps erupted around the table. Clara's face twisted with fury, but Emma didn't stop. You humiliated me tonight, thinking it would break me. But all you did was reveal who you truly are. A man so small he needs to tear others down to feel powerful. You brought your mistress into our home, into this very hall, thinking you could erase me in front of everyone. But look around, Damien. Emma lifted the folder high enough for all to see. Her hand steady now. I'm still here. And I'm the one holding everything you thought was yours. The room thundered with whispers, louder this time, charged with energy. Emma's voice carried above them all. This mansion, this legacy, this family's name, it belongs to me now. And when my child is born, it will belong to them, not to you, not to your arrogance, and certainly not to a woman who laughs at the pain of others. Clara rose abruptly, slamming her hand on the table. You can't do this. You don't have the strength. You don't have the power. You don't even belong in this world. Emma turned her eyes to Clara, no longer trembling, no longer shrinking under her cruelty. You're right. I don't belong in your world, the world of greed, vanity, and shallow victories. But I do belong in this house, because I was chosen, not for my beauty or my ambition, but for something you'll never understand: integrity. The words struck Clara like a slap. She faltered, her face pale with rage. Damien pushed back his chair violently, standing to his full height, his voice booming. I won't stand for this. You think you can take my life, my empire, everything I built? I'll fight you for it, Emma. I'll drag you through courts, through the mud, until you beg for mercy. Emma held his gaze, her own voice unwavering. Do what you must, but you'll never take from me what matters most, my child, and you will never again have the power to humiliate me. The room buzzed with shock. The timid school teacher they had pitied hours ago was gone. In her place stood a woman transformed, her back straight, her eyes fierce, her presence commanding. Eleanor smiled faintly, pride flickering in her stern gaze. She had seen the fire in Emma all along. She had simply been waiting for her to unleash it. Emma placed the documents carefully back into the folder, then straightened her shoulders. This isn't the end, Damien. This is the beginning of a new chapter, and you will learn, along with everyone else in this room, that underestimating me was your greatest mistake. Clara's voice cracked with desperation. She can't win. Damien, do something. But Damien could only stand there, fists trembling, as the room around him shifted. The guests, once his admirers, now whispered with disdain. Some looked at Emma with respect, others with awe. Clara reached for his arm, but for the first time Damien didn't move to reassure her. He was paralyzed by the reality crashing down around him. Emma turned away from them, her focus no longer on the husband who betrayed her, or the mistress who mocked her. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, her eyes glowing with a fire that came from somewhere deeper than pride. For the first time all night, Emma felt the weight of humiliation lift from her shoulders. She wasn't broken, she wasn't defeated. She was rising, not just for herself, but for the child who would one day know their mother had fought for them. The orchestra, silent until now, began to play again, softly, hesitantly, as though acknowledging the shift of power in the room. Emma stepped forward, past Damien, past Clara, past the stunned faces of the elite. Each step echoed with newfound strength. When she reached the center of the hall, she turned back, her eyes locking on the guests who had once pitied her. Her voice rang clear, echoing across marble and crystal. You came tonight expecting to see a spectacle of betrayal, but what you've witnessed is something else entirely. You've witnessed the rebirth of a woman who will no longer be silenced. I am Emma Carter, and I will never be forgotten. The hall erupted, not in laughter, not in whispers, but in applause. It started with a few, hesitant at first, then spread like fire until the walls vibrated with the sound. Damien's face twisted with rage. Clara's eyes burned with hatred. But Emma stood tall, her chin lifted, the applause washing over her like a tide of vindication. And as the clapping thundered, Eleanor leaned close, her voice just for Emma. This is only the beginning. Tomorrow, we make it official. Emma's eyes widened. Tomorrow? What could Eleanor possibly have planned that would seal this transformation forever? The applause still echoed in the hall when Eleanor raised her cane, silencing the crowd once again. Her eyes, sharp and commanding, swept across the table. Tomorrow, she said firmly, the Carter estate and holdings will be transferred under Emma's authority. Tonight, however, there is unfinished business. The guests shifted in their seats, anticipation crackling like electricity. They had come for dinner, but what they were witnessing was far more thrilling. The unraveling of power, the collapse of arrogance, and the rise of a woman they had once pitied. Damien's voice thundered above the whispers. Enough of this madness. I won't stand here and be humiliated by my own mother and my wife, Eleanor finished coldly, cutting him off. The word you've forgotten, Damien, is wife. She is your wife, the mother of your child, and the only one at this table who still carries the dignity of this family. Clara scoffed, stepping forward, her red dress shimmering under the chandelier. Dignity? Look at her. She's shaking, crying, clinging to papers like a child clings to toys. She's not fit to lead anything, least of all this empire. Damien built this life. He deserves it, not her. Emma turned slowly, meeting Clara's venom with calm steel. Her voice, soft yet piercing, cut through the hall. Did Damien build it, Clara? Or did generations before him sacrifice sweat and bleed for this family's name? Damien inherited wealth, but wealth without character is a house built on sand. Tonight, that house collapses. The guests erupted in murmurs. Damien's face turned red, his fists clenched at his sides. Clara clung to his arm desperately, her mask of superiority cracking. Eleanor nodded at Emma, then gestured to the butler. He stepped forward, carrying another folder. This one slimmer, but just as dangerous. He placed it gently on the table. These, Eleanor declared, her voice ringing out, are the records Damien thought he had hidden. The debts, the reckless deals, the gambling of our assets to impress his mistress and his ego. I've tolerated his mistakes long enough, but I will not watch him drag this family's name into ruin. Gasps tore through the room. Several guests covered their mouths in shock. Others whispered furiously, already calculating how this scandal would ripple through business and society. Damien's eyes widened. You went through my records? He spat. I safeguarded this family, Eleanor said coldly. Something you never learned to do. Emma stepped forward then, her chin high, her voice clear. This is what you didn't want them to see, Damien. The truth. You built your empire on arrogance, not wisdom, and you thought no one would hold you accountable. But tonight, accountability has come. She turned to Clara, her gaze unflinching. And you, Clara, you mocked me, called me weak, laughed while I cried. But tell me, what power do you hold without him? You're nothing more than a shadow clinging to someone else's name. When his world crumbles, so will yours. Clara's face contorted with fury. You think you've won? You think any of these people respect you? They're clapping because they enjoy the spectacle, not because they believe in you. Emma's lips curved in the faintest smile. Perhaps, but respect is earned, Clara, and tonight, I've earned theirs. What have you earned but contempt? The words struck like a blade. Clara recoiled, her confidence unraveling before the watching eyes of the elite. Damien, desperate, slammed his hands on the table. I won't allow this. This house, this name, it's mine. You can't take it from me. Emma stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. Her voice dropped to a steady, chilling calm. No, Damien. You already gave it away. The moment you chose betrayal over loyalty, greed over honor, arrogance over love, you lost it all. I'm not taking it from you. You threw it away. The guests erupted in gasps again. Damien's face twisted in rage, his mouth opening to lash back, but before he could speak, Eleanor's cane struck the floor. Enough, she commanded. This dinner has witnessed enough disgrace. Tonight will be remembered, not for your cruelty, Damien, but for Emma's strength. She is the future of this family. And if any of you doubt it, look into her eyes. Tell me you do not see the strength of a woman who has endured humiliation and risen stronger for it. The hall grew quiet. Slowly, almost reverently, the guests turned their eyes to Emma, and one by one they began to nod. A man at the far end of the table, an old business partner of the Carters, rose to his feet. Mrs. Carter, he said respectfully, addressing Emma, not Eleanor, you have my support. Another followed, then another. Soon, applause filled the hall again, but this time it was not scattered or hesitant. It was thunderous, unified. Emma stood taller, the storm of humiliation replaced by the calm of vindication. She no longer felt like the broken woman in the hallway. She felt like a leader, like a mother who would protect her child with every breath. Clara grabbed Damien's arm again, her voice shrill with panic. Do something. Stop them. Don't let her steal everything. But Damien's shoulders slumped. The fury drained from his face, replaced by something Emma had never seen in him before: fear. He looked at his mother, then at the guests, then at Emma. For the first time in his life, Damien Carter realized he had lost. Emma turned away from him, her voice carrying over the applause. Tonight I reclaim my dignity. Tonight I rise not as a victim, but as the true matriarch of this family. And let this be a lesson to all. A woman may be tested, broken, humiliated, but she will rise, always. The hall roared with approval, glasses lifted high, the orchestra striking triumphant chords. Clara buried her face in her hands, unable to bear the weight of disgrace. Damien stood frozen, stripped of everything that had once made him untouchable. And Emma stood radiant, the power of justice and dignity surrounding her like armor. Yet as the applause reached its peak, Eleanor leaned close once more, her voice quiet but firm. "You've won tonight, child. But victory comes with responsibility. Tomorrow the world will know, and you must be ready." Emma's breath caught. Tomorrow? The world? What exactly had Eleanor planned, and what storm was waiting beyond these mansion walls? The applause faded slowly, like thunder rolling away after a storm. Emma stood tall, her hands resting on the folder that symbolized a new chapter in her life. For the first time that night, she didn't feel like an outsider in her own home. She felt like the rightful heart of it, but Eleanor's words lingered in her mind. Tomorrow, the world will know. That night, Emma barely slept. She sat by her window, looking out at the sprawling estate, the stars glimmering above. Her thoughts swirled like restless winds. Tomorrow, this private storm would become public. Tomorrow, the newspapers, the business world, and society itself would see her not as the timid wife who was humiliated, but as the woman who reclaimed everything. Fear tried to creep in, whispering doubts. Could she bear that weight? Could she endure the scrutiny of a world eager to feast on scandal? But then, as if in answer, her child stirred within her. Emma placed her hands on her belly, smiling through the tears. "We'll face it together," she whispered. By morning, the mansion was buzzing. Reporters gathered at the gates, their cameras flashing as black cars pulled into the driveway. Invitations had been sent overnight, and the Carter matriarch had summoned business leaders, investors, and the press. The world would hear the truth, not as rumor, but from Emma herself. Inside, Emma dressed not in the muted gowns she once wore, to blend in, but in a sleek ivory dress that flowed around her like quiet strength. Her hair, usually tied back in simplicity, was brushed smooth, framing her face with dignity. She looked at herself in the mirror, and for the first time thought, "This is who I was meant to be." When she stepped into the grand hall again, the energy was electric. Cameras clicked, voices murmured, and all eyes turned to her. Eleanor stood at her side, her cane tapping rhythmically as she led Emma to the podium set at the center. Damien and Clara were nowhere to be seen. They had been escorted to another wing of the house, their protests falling on deaf ears. Emma's heart pounded as she stepped up to the microphone. For a moment, silence pressed down on her, the weight of expectation almost unbearable. But then she remembered the night before. The laughter, the humiliation, the tears in the hallway, and she remembered how she had risen. Her voice, clear and steady, filled the hall. "For too long, I stood in the shadows, unseen, unheard. Many of you know me only as Damien Carter's wife, the quiet woman beside him at galas and dinners. But last night, you saw what happens when arrogance and betrayal are allowed to flourish. You saw a man throw away his honor, and a woman mocked for her dignity. And you saw me rise." The crowd was silent, leaning in. Emma continued. "Today I stand before you not as a victim, but as the rightful matriarch of this family. With the blessing of Eleanor Carter, I now hold the Carter legacy, not to flaunt wealth or power, but to protect it, for my child, for the generations to come, and for the values this family was built on: honor, respect, and resilience." A wave of murmurs rippled, but this time it was admiration, not scandal. Emma's eyes swept the room. We live in a world where women are too often silenced, humiliated, told to accept betrayal as if it were their fault. Last night, I was humiliated. I was mocked. But I am still here, and I will not only endure, I will lead. Applause began to build, cautious at first, then swelling into something stronger. Emma raised her hand, quieting the room. "This isn't just my story. It is the story of every woman who has been told she is not enough. Every woman who has been betrayed, abandoned, or silenced. To you I say this: you are stronger than you know. You carry within you a dignity that no one can steal, not even those who laugh at your pain. Rise. Stand tall. Protect what is yours, because when you do, no one can ever take it away." The hall erupted in thunderous applause. Some stood, clapping until their hands turned red. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment that would soon be splashed across every headline. At the edge of the crowd, Emma caught sight of Damien and Clara, restrained by the cold reality of their downfall. Damien's face was pale, his eyes hollow with defeat. Clara's cheeks were streaked with tears, her once smug smile gone. They were no longer the center of attention, no longer admired or feared. They were shadows fading from relevance. Emma turned away from them, no longer needing to prove herself. Their power over her was gone. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice carrying across the room. Let it be known, from this day forward, Emma Carter is the leader of this family. She carries our name, our honor, and our future. And she will not stand alone. The applause thundered again. Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion as she looked at Eleanor, this woman who had once seemed so distant, now standing firmly beside her. Tears glistened in Emma's eyes as she whispered, "Thank you." Eleanor nodded, her voice low but steady. "No, thank you. You've given this family hope again." As the crowd continued to cheer, Emma placed her hand gently over her belly, her smile radiant. She thought of the child within her, the life that had given her strength when she thought she had none. "This is for you," she whispered softly. "For us." The press conference ended with Emma standing tall, her image already making its way across the world. By nightfall, headlines screamed her triumph. Humiliated wife becomes matriarch. Emma Carter claims legacy. Billionaire's mistress exposed at mansion dinner. Emma Carter, a new era for the Carter empire. The world that once ignored her now celebrated her. Strangers sent letters of admiration. Women across the city whispered her name with pride, and even men who had doubted her spoke of her strength. But for Emma, the true victory wasn't in the headlines or the applause. It was in the quiet moments, the peace she felt when she rested her hand on her belly, the pride that filled her heart when she thought of the legacy she would pass on. She knew challenges still lay ahead. Damien would not give up easily. Clara would not disappear quietly. The world would continue to test her. But Emma was no longer afraid. She had walked through humiliation, through despair, through fire, and she had emerged stronger than she ever believed possible. As the sun set that evening, casting golden light across the mansion, Emma stood on the balcony, the wind lifting her hair. Below, the gardens stretched wide, symbols of the empire she now protected. Beside her, Eleanor placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and proud. "You did well," Eleanor said. Emma smiled. "I'm just getting started." And with that, she turned her gaze to the horizon, her heart steady, her resolve unshakable. She was no longer just Emma, the wife who was humiliated. She was Emma Carter, the woman who rose, and the world would never forget her. So the story has come to an end. And my dear friends, you're still here, aren't you? If you're truly watching until now, it means something in this story has touched your heart in a way words can't fully explain. Maybe you saw yourself in Emma's pain. Maybe you felt the sting of betrayal, the weight of silence, or the fear of standing alone. But you also witnessed her rise. Life, my friends, is not about avoiding storms. It's about learning to dance in the rain. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Emma could have crumbled. She could have walked away in silence. But instead, she chose to rise, to claim her worth, to protect her child, and to show the world that dignity is a power no one can take from you. And maybe, just maybe, this is what life is asking of you too. To take the pain you've carried, the betrayal you've endured, and let it forge a new kind of strength inside you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Emma's humiliation became her path to transformation. Your struggles can be the same. So tonight, as we close this chapter, I want you to carry one truth with you. You are stronger than you think. You are worth more than the pain you've suffered. And like Emma, you can rise. If this story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need hope tonight, and subscribe to our channel. Because here, we believe in stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that no matter how broken we feel, there's always a way to rise again. And maybe, my friend, this is your time to rise.